Yeah, I mean, you're right, man. And I just did an interview right before coming on with you with Judy Shelton and her book, Good as Gold. And I asked her about that. I said, why the hell has Fort Knox and the New York Federal Reserve basement not been audited since 1953? Why is Ron Paul always rebuffed when he calls for auditing the gold that belongs to the people? The Federal Reserve is holding it on behalf of the Treasury. It is the people's gold. And I think in order to inspire confidence and trust, absolutely. But what you are seeing is that the rest of the world is looking at gold as an option to hold rather, in my mind, than the U.S. Treasury. The U.S. Treasury, which has been weaponized, can be taken and in fact, using those proceeds potentially to give to a country you're in the midst of a war against, the way that we have done against Russia. We defaulted on $5 billion worth of their U.S. treasuries that we were holding, and we gave the proceeds to the Ukraine. $50 billion worth of European treasuries, the EU took all of the interest and gave that in the form of a loan to the Ukraine, amounts to several billion dollars. The West, I believe, has crossed a line that's very difficult to come back from. Again, the erosion of trust. And so not only that, you look at last year, it was the worst year ever for the 10-year treasury, or the second worst year ever for the 10-year treasury. In fact, where gold had less volatility for the first time in 45 years than the U.S. Treasury did. And this is why Judy Shelton's idea, the whole idea of her book, is to come back to a 50-year treasury that is redeemable in gold at the end of a 50-year period, to inspire confidence. But to her point, and to my question to her, is that in order for this to work, don't we have to show how much gold we truly have? And her answer was yes. And when we look at the rest of the world is not being honest. China, for example, is not being honest about how much gold they have. They've been producing between 300 and 500 metric tons a year as the largest producer in the world, using our trade imbalance to mine gold that it was even uneconomical. They see the big picture. They look out into the future. They don't care what it costs to pull it out of the ground at. Those numbers alone would be far more than we have for years, Kai. I've been doing this for 35 years this February. And forever, people would say to me back in the 90s, yeah, and I'm talking mentors of mine, Jim Sinclair, Richard Russell, people that I would have the good fortune of talking to, and they would say, look, the 1,200 metric tons that never seemed to change way back then, that the Chinese would never update. Well, that's not right. They have way more than they're telling us. It's a strategic decision. And now they're at 2,300 metric tons. So in all of the, or 24, whatever it is, all those years, they've only added 800 metric tons. That's silly. It's not even close. And they're the largest producer in the world. They're the largest importer in the world. They're the second largest producer of silver in the world. They are a net importer, used to be a net exporter. They're buying doré, they're buying concentrate. The countries that they are striking deals with on the Belt Road are all massively resource rich and underdeveloped. But when these countries buy, for example, through a sovereign wealth fund, that's not reported to the IMF. The doré and the concentrate is not 995 pure or 999 pure. That's not reported to the IMF. When the People's Liberation Army buys, and they probably have as much or more than the PBOC, that's not reported to the IMF. And so, why would they be forthright and open about the amount of gold that they have when we aren't? And not only that, when you look at the fact that the BIS reclassified gold as the world's only other tier 1 reserve asset, and you see all of the central banks accumulated, including those in Europe, and when they saw what happened to the Bundesbank, give us back our gold, well, it only takes 5, 6, 7 years to get it back. I think the lack of trust in our traditional instruments like treasury instruments, and the possibility of going back to a system, as Zoltan Pozar says, Bretton Woods 3, a system that will be about transparency, a la blockchain and commodities, a la gold. Just like Delma Rousseff told us, the unit would be gold backed, 40% traded on Enbridge, and would be deliverable upon demand. Well, it just makes sense that the central banks understand this. Look, you could talk about the rise of cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin, and that could be a strategic asset. Sure, but it ain't going to back a currency system and has too much volatility. Gold, on the other hand, would be the perfect backing. Even Kristalina Georgieva, the head of the IMF, said a central bank digital currency not pegged to something is fiat. Well, what else are they going to peg it to but what the BIS said is the only other tier 1 asset? And you go back to the beginning of 23, the report that came out of the IMF saying gold as an international reserve currency, comma, a barbarous relic, no more, question mark. You put all of the things together, even look at the European central banks in your neck of the woods. All of them have been accumulating gold, and look at the way that the gold relation to their GDP is level across the entire European Union. It's as if they're all preparing for some form of a gold revaluation, some form of a new system tied to gold. So these countries, it would be in their best interest to not say, this is how much we have. And I find it, there's a fine line between conspiracy and reality, Kai. And you look at this new supposed but unverified massive biggest gold discovery ever found in China. Well, what better way for them in a year or two, when this were to happen, to say, yes, we've told you this is all we have, but this gold find, we were able to extract so much gold that, and you mentioned Alistair McLeod. 2 years ago, Alistair said the Chinese had 38,000 metric tons in his estimation, 20 by the state and 18 by the people. What better way to say, actually, we have 45,000 metric tons, not the 26 that we told you, because this gold find, well, it was huge. Well, how would we know? How would anyone know? My point to you is simply this. Do not trust what they're saying as it relates to gold, because we're playing the same game. No one knows how much gold we have, if we even have it any longer. And if indeed we are moving to a system that is tied to the stability of gold, as Judy Shelton says, is the only way to reestablish trust. Now, hers is not quite the gold standard as it once was, the classic gold standard, but tying a 50-year treasury to gold, which would be the first pathway to reestablishing trust with the United States monetary policy. Same thing is true with global monetary policy. And if that's where they think it's all going, it doesn't do them any good, not only to tell everyone how much gold they have, but to keep their mouth shut in terms of how much through proxy banks and sovereign wealth funds that they are draining from the COMEX and from the LBMA, using the stupidity of the Western banks that continue to suppress the price. And look at the drawdown in supply. We're just playing right into the hands of these countries. So it doesn't do any good to say how much they're accumulating or how much they have if the ultimate goal is to reintroduce this asset into the backing of a new monetary system. And I think ultimately that is where it will go to some degree. And maybe what the BIS did put a little bit of a damper. But remember, this is Chinese technology. They're going to continue to move forward with this, and they're going to settle in local currencies, and they are going to offset any difference on a net basis with gold until they get a new system. I think the whole thing is moving in that direction. And anyone that would hold treasuries that aren't gold backed of any duration right now in a country that has signaled inflation over austerity forever is foolish, especially when it can be weaponized. And that is what led to this whole group of the BRICS and the whole idea of using a gold-backed currency instead of a dollar, which is losing value precipitously every day and can be weaponized against you if we don't agree with what you're doing. I think it's a strategic metal, period. And it's not an industrial metal as they want us to believe. I think the real question, Kai, is why are 8 banks holding the largest concentrated short position in any commodity traded on the COMEX market, about 700 plus million ounces? But 8 commercial banks hold what amounts to the largest concentrated short position in any commodity ever traded on COMEX. And why is there a 4 to 6 billion with a B ounce shortfall on the LBMA in naked shorts, meaning they're shorting the price, trying to drive it down with nothing standing behind it but a big checkbook? And that really, to me, is the biggest question. And I've talked about this at length, where, the military industrial complex has removed silver from the Silver Institute metrics. And here we are 4 years into a structural supply demand deficit, another 240 or 50 million ounce shortfall again this year, amounting to over 1 billion ounces short in the last 4 to 5 years from supply to demand. And at the same time, why isn't the price rising when India has imported close to 900 million ounces over that same period of time? That's more silver than the entire stockpile is at the LBMA. They say they have 800 million ounces, Kai, of which 500 million purportedly belong to the ETFs. That leaves a 300 million ounce float. The LBMA is trading, by their own admission, 290 million ounces per day, the entire float. But what is interesting is they admit to that number being 10 times understated or more, because they only post the final settlement numbers each day, not all of the trades that it took to get there. So in essence, they're saying, well, we're actually trading upwards ends of 3 billion ounces of silver per day, which is 3.5 times annual global mine supply, 10 times the amount of silver they have backing those contracts. And so those commercial banks that are doing this, that are shorting the price of silver, all of them west, are doing so at 90 to 95% naked clip, meaning they don't have the silver behind it, just big checkbooks. And this is why you see a 45-degree angle of the silver that was held at the LBMA now is being drained and has been delivered away. The same thing is happening on COMEX, and the same thing is even happening on the Shanghai Metals Exchange. The metals are being drained. Now, I would say they're doing it very strategically. They are not doing it in a manner that is arousing too much attention.